Welcome to Inside Personal Growth Podcast. Deep dive with us as we unlock the secrets to personal development, empowering you to thrive. Here, growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Tune in, transform, and take your life to the next level by listening to just one of our podcasts. Well, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voice, the host of Inside Personal Growth. You may recognize this gentleman. He did a podcast with us many moons ago. We'll put a link to it. But his name is Finnian Kelly. Finnian, this is all about you in this new book, Intentionality. Good day to you.
Thanks so much, Greg. I really enjoyed our last conversation. So I know that this won't be pre-scripted. We're going to allow presence to come through you. And you set an intention beforehand, and I didn't share my intention. My intention was to be connected to the universal mind and allow some insights to come through that perhaps I haven't shared before.
You know, you're being channeled with these great insights all the time, my friend. So it's just a matter of awakening to them and allowing them to flow. So that's what this is going to be, a podcast full of flow and good energy. So thank you for that. Well, so for all of my listeners, we're going to be talking about this new book called Intentionality. I'm going to let the listeners know something about you. There's lots of people out there that don't know who you are. They obviously hear your accent and they go, where the hell's this guy from? But he's a sought-after speaker, event facilitator, executive coach. Finnian has been dubbed the business mystic because of his unique ability to put consciousness into business and inspire leaders to find new levels of meaning and purpose through their creative endeavors. As a creator and chief visionary officer of Intentionality.com, which is where you can go to learn more about him, his courses, his brief breath work. Finnian built and exited 2 multimillion-dollar companies in the financial services industry. Through the 4 paths of intentionality framework, Finnian guides people to be purposeful and aligned in their beliefs, thoughts, behaviors, so that they can feel more love in their life. And it's www.intentionality. And I'm going to spell that out because sometimes people can slip up on that. intentionality.com. Intentionality.com. It'll be in the blog as well. Again, go pick up this great Hay House book. Well, so Finnian, one of the deals that really, I read your background and being in the Australian military and all the cool things that you did. But you introduced this book with your personal journey and what seemed like a perfect life and then hitting rock bottom. You've been there. Everybody listening has been to rock bottom once, twice, 3 times. Can you elaborate on the pivotal moment when you realized that you needed to change your approach to living your life, and what really happened for you?
Yeah, so what happened was I was living a very intentional life, and I was very focused on visions, outcomes, goals, had everything mapped out. And I went through basically a life journey of constantly going, all right, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And then one time when I was 24 years old, I had just met my partner who I fell in love with, and we sat down and went, all right, let's go on a life journey. Let's write all this down. What will make this the most incredible life? And we wrote out a vision, and then we went out after it. Now, funnily enough, we actually achieved our vision. We even achieved it in a greater way. We rather than just selling one company, we sold 2. We were living in a mansion in a ski resort in America, skiing lots of days, 100 days a year. We were financially independent. We were in love. We were married, all these different elements. However, what we thought would happen once we achieved that state didn't actually happen. Now, I don't know if we really knew what we were hoping to achieve in that place, but I've now reflected what we were wanting was some form of feeling worthy or enough or safe or loving. And unfortunately, it didn't come. And in that moment when it didn't come, the illusion came crashing down because I'd always just lived in this state of when I have this, everything will be better. But unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, my when came. So now the illusion, I had to face it for what it really was. And what I identified was that it didn't give me what I was hoping for. And I don't think I actually knew what I was hoping for. And in that place, it was so confronting. And then I didn't pay attention. And then we started just doing more things. We started starting new businesses, doing the normal path, and a series of events happened, which almost the universe, basically, I look back now and it was, the universe was trying to give us little signs and going, this path of the external, the future is never going to fulfill you. But we weren't paying attention. And eventually it was just so much at once. It was almost like spirit picked up my soul and smashed it on the ground and went, wake up. Like, this isn't going to work anymore. And in that moment, I was devastated. I'd lost financial wealth. I'd lost identity. I'd lost my partner. And I was sitting all alone. And I was questioning even how do I get through each day. And one day, I remember saying to myself, I was so disgusted with how I felt in that moment. And I said, I never want to feel like this again. And that was when the light bulb came on.
I think you used the operative word. And there's a fellow Australian, Elizabeth, who writes a book, Feeling Forward. She's been on the podcast. And you've said this many times in the last 3 minutes, feeling. Because really what we're looking for is the feeling, not the well, let's say you were shooting for all these goals and all this aspiration to do all these wonderful things, but none of it was making you feel the way you wanted to feel any better. You were achieving, and then you say, when is enough enough? Because you said, hey, let's riff on this podcast. And I'm going to ask most listeners is, when is enough enough? And when are you going to actually get to the feeling? So you get to this pivotal point in your life. You wake up one day, right? And all of a sudden you're saying, I never want to feel this way again. What shifted for you so you didn't have to feel that way again?
Well, great awareness. So one was I looked at my options, and suddenly the options that I'd always used in the past when I was feeling low, they just weren't available to me anymore because I couldn't trick myself. I couldn't say, well, if I make this amount of money, it'll all be better because I've done that. If I have this recognition, it'll make it all feel better because I've done that. If I fall in love, it'll make it all feel better because I've done that as well. So suddenly I went, well, none of those paths work anymore. So then I just started going, well, what path could work? And ultimately, what could I do right now to make myself feel a little bit better? That's what it really came down. I wasn't thinking about the future. The future was too confronting for me. And the past was too daunting for me as well. All I could focus on right now, how do I get through to the end of the day feeling a little bit better, to just give myself a little bit of a break? So then I'm a big journaler, and I reflected. I looked back through my journals and went, what are things that have made me feel a little bit better? And I wrote down, I just started writing a list. And sometimes you've got to get very basic to have the biggest transformation in your life. I just started writing a list. I went, what do things make me feel better? Well, I know if I sit in the sun, I like sun. I go for a walk. I like walks. I do something kind for someone. I meditate. I breathe. I do some movement. And I ended up with 16 things. And this list saved me. And I just went, okay, what is the easiest thing for me to do right now out of those 16? And I went, well, I have a big window and it looks sunny outside. I can take 5 steps and just go sit outside and let the sun flow in. And I'd sit there. And for a little moment, my mind, yes, it was been going over and over, criticizing, judging myself, going, how could you do this, questioning. But then I just got a little break. There was a split moment. It could have been just a little moment where I forgot who I was. And I was just embracing the sun. And I went, well, that felt nice. And then I started going, what's the next easiest thing I could do? Well, I've got a phone here. I could call a friend and just have a chat with them. And I started identifying if I did 5 of these, I felt okay. If I did 10 of these a day, I actually felt okay when I went to bed. Now then, I'd wake up the next morning and remember who I was and all my problems, and I'd go through the process again. And eventually, I did start feeling better because what I was doing was prioritizing what really mattered to me right now.
Well, you created a new pathway for you. In other words, you created a new habit. You know, you just kept doing these 16 things over and over and over again. So they got ingrained in your DNA. What I'd ask you, though, because, you know, there's a lot of listeners out there today, we're living in interesting times, very interesting times. Now, from a standpoint of historically, have we experienced stuff like we are today? I don't know, because I didn't live back then, but what I've read is that some of those times back then were even more daunting than what we're having now, as with relation to what people had to deal with. But my sense is that people, Finnian, from where I sit doing podcast after podcast, listening to great authors talk about their books, there's like this, if you're standing on a beach and a wave comes in and the sand moves out from underneath your feet, okay? And you don't feel secure. People are like, how do I put my hands around this amorphous thing that's happening to me? I can't predict my future. I can't, just like you were talking about, all the challenges that you faced, right? It was like, I lost everything. I lost my love. I lost my life. I lost my business. I lost. I think people are feeling this sense of that sand is moving. It's very unsteady and very uncertain. And as human beings, we want to be in that certainty. We want to be in that predictability. How is it that you would advise somebody to say, be okay knowing that you can't predict it, and be intentional in the moment to love where you are now? How do you do that?
Yeah, so there's a few things. So when we reflect on our story of our life, when people talk about the hardships and we say, would you change your life? They always reflect and go, you know what? Even though it was really hard, I would never have given that up, because that enabled me to grow. I learned these things and it put me in this different state. So with that knowledge that generally in the future, you're going to look back and go, oh yeah, that actually was one of the best things that happened for me. Couldn't we flip the script in the present moment and go, this is happening for me, not to me. Like, here's a moment of opportunity. Doesn't mean it won't be challenging or unpleasant, but our experience with it will be very different. So that's one. Another part of it is to focus on what is true and what do we have rather than what we're losing. So when we come back to the present moment and we're connected to our breath, one of the great ways, we're feeling ourselves rooted to the ground, we're feeling that electromagnetic field with the blood flooding through us, we're feeling the connection to the universal mind, we start realizing we're here, we're alive, magic is happening. I'm just breathing and it's just automatically happening, all of this. Actually, there's nothing to be feeling that worried about right now. Like, it's the mind that takes us out of the present moment and creates these future scenarios or regrets over the past. So that's another element. And then,
well, you do, not to insert here, but I have this question around the breath work, this mind, body, spirit connection. I want you to get into explaining the intentionality of that breath work in our ability to improve our overall well-being. But I remember reading somewhere, Bruce Cryer is a really good friend of mine, and I'm doing a course with him right now, and he used to be the CEO of HeartMath. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading about you in HeartMath, okay? So what I'm looking at here is to take a deeper dive with my audience on breath work. They've probably heard it. Some may have experienced it. I've watched your videos at your website. You are really, really good at leading people through this. There's now studios people can go to do breath work in 45 minutes, right? So explain why this breath work to you, because you mentioned 5 minutes ago that you went outside your door and you sat there and you closed your eyes and you breathed. Now, prior to that, I would assume in the military, you maybe got some training around breath work as well. Mm-hmm. So you'd been exposed to this before, because if you're a high-performing military person, you get that. Tell us what it's all about. Why are you so intense about wanting to teach people this technique? And what is it going to do for my listeners?
So breath represents life. Think about it. First baby comes out, takes a breath. It's like, oh, my baby's alive. Beautiful. And then if you witness anyone cross and that breath goes out, it's also another moment where it's like, oh, that's end of this life cycle. And in between, we're expanding and contracting. And the one thing that we can't live without for the shortest amount of time is breath. So it's everything. It's also, everyone has access to it. So I love anything that we don't have to rely on the external or anything that has to cost money. I want to rely on things that we innately have to us. And I believe this beautiful divine intelligence gave everything we need to us. So breath is there. We also look at the nature of the breath. It's a really interesting part of our body. The subconscious or the autonomic system automatically drives it. Like, we don't have to think about the breathing, but the breath just happens. However, unlike other faculties of the body, we can also consciously change it by just through our attention. I can go, you know what, I want more energy, I'm going to upregulate. I want to relax, I'm going to breathe out slower. So there's an interesting connection between the conscious and the subconscious minds. And that's really what we're trying to do in life, is get an alignment between the conscious and the subconscious minds. But a lot of the time they're working against each other. So the breath, what it does, it almost puts us in this place, it puts us in this place of presence where we have this opportunity to suspend the automatic behavior from the program. Because some of these programs, some are working really well for us, but often they're not. They're a false narrative which are driving undesirable outcomes in our life. And the nature of the subconscious, it drives 95% of our daily thoughts and behaviors. So it really determines the quality of our life. So that breath, what it does is when we take a breath, we drop into the present moment and it creates a little gap, a little bit of suspension where we get to observe what is the automatic program about to do with our conscious awareness. And we can decide, is that going to serve us? And is that going to lead to the desired feelings we want? Or do we need to override the program with conscious awareness? And that's becoming conscious, really. That's waking up to go, I don't actually have to do that. Just because the program's like wanting me to do that, I have the ability to override it. So what it is, it's liberation, it's freedom. It's
does it not also open up, just for purposes so my listeners get this, when you do kind of somatic breathing and you go in, you can go to some very, very deep levels and you actually get past life kind of almost regressions. In other words, you don't really need to take LSD anymore and microdose, because the new thing is what you're teaching. This literally does take you on a really good trip, but it also can take you on a trip down a path where a lot of emotion gets released about baggage you're carrying around stuff. Speak about that a little bit, because I'm sure this happens in your classes.
Definitely.
And I want you to mention also the application you've created to allow people to have easy access to breathwork. It's in iOS and Android. So we'll put a link to that as well for the listeners, but mention that app as well.
Certainly. So what we're focusing on doing, becoming more awake, is to recode the subconscious so it's working for us rather than against us. There's two ways to recode the subconscious. One is through repetition, which is the daily behaviors connecting the feelings which are going to imprint onto the subconscious, and it creates a habit. That's one way. And the breath is always the answer. The breath is the entry to go, I'm going to override the old behavior by suspending the breath and acting the new behavior. That's one way. It's a bit more mechanical. It requires more will, and it's the repetitive practice. The other way is what I call energy interventions. How is the subconscious program formed in the first place? It was from a strong enough feeling, which the subconscious took us to be true, and effectively energy got suppressed. And then over time, we keep working that same belief loop, and it gets builds over time. So sometimes that energy is so locked that we need to use a lot of energy to go down and excavate it and bring it back up. And breath is, once again, in a very intentional way, we can use that by bringing a lot of breath into it.
So let me, pardon for interrupting, but you said belief loop. Some people have never heard that. So what you're doing is you're breaking the cycle of that belief loop through the breath work. We talk about people who tapping, So the point is, you are trying, I go back to the days of Tony Robbins and neuro-linguistic programming with rubber bands on the wrist, right? So, I'm old enough to recall going to workshops of his, and we'd put rubber bands and we'd twing them against our arms. In this case, you're using the breath, which you say is totally free, which it is. You don't need an extra device or whatever. And you literally break that belief loop. Is that correct?
That's right. So what is a belief loop? Beliefs are formed in our subconscious, and they get created through a strong emotion. A feeling imprints on a belief, and then eventually the subconscious goes, okay, I'll create a program to protect you or create more of that in your life. Then those beliefs then send up information to the conscious mind through thoughts, and then we act on those thoughts through behaviors, which then results in an outcome, which results in a feeling, which generally reaffirms the belief cycle to start with. And that's why beliefs get stronger over time. So what we need to do is we need to go in and first bring awareness. What is even down in our subconscious? Most people have no idea what their beliefs are. And we go in and then we use the breath to have this experience where we're dislodging the energy, and then effectively we're allowing things to bubble up to the surface. And then we have an opportunity to integrate the emotions that perhaps we didn't feel safe to in the past, or we created a inaccurate representation or perspective of them in the present moment. And then when we release those feelings, integrate those feelings, then we have an opportunity for the belief loop to loosen its charge. And then we can actually recode with new beliefs through positive, strong feelings. So rather than being in a place of alone, sad, or anything, we start driving ourselves with peace, love, and joy. And then we create new belief loops. So effectively, we can recode 40 years, for example, of one belief in a very intentional 30-minute session. However,
you sound like Bruce Lipton.
Oh, I love Bruce Lipton. I reference Bruce Lipton in the book. But then the key is we can't just rely on that magically recoding process, because the subconscious is just as impressionable the next day. And we're always
the boot up disc, right, that I put in olden days into the computer, think of that as kind of the subconscious, what was on that disc. You're actually reprogramming it, right?
Yeah.
Through what you're doing. And I want to get into this area because your book delves into the energy centers or chakras in the body as well. All of my listeners have heard about chakras. They understand the crown chakra and all the various chakras. How can balancing these energy centers, because these are all centers in our body, contribute to more intentionally and harmonious life? Because, okay, I do yoga. Yoga is like, I do that because I'm actually resetting, right, these energy centers, right? But yoga isn't always, do you remember George Leonard, ITP? So integrative transformative practice was basically, if you go back to the whole thing that I want to explain just for a second here, he had yoga, meditation, and Tai Chi all wrapped into one practice for 2 hours. When you left an ITP practice, you literally felt like you were floating in outer space. It was that good. And so that's the movement. It's the intentionality, just like what you're talking. It's the breathing. It's the meditation. So talk with us about aligning these kind of chakra centers through the techniques that you're using with the breath work.
Right. So when I think of alignment, I think about how do we get all these energy centers working together, and how are we making sure that we have access to all of them? Because I like to think of the lower energy centers, the places from the solar plexus down, as the place where it's almost the human experience. This is the place where the ego loves to hang out. And it's very important for us to have a spiritual experience, for us to be super grounded and open. Like, there's a lot of people who claim to be spiritual, but they haven't created a foundation of safety or security, and then your foundations are going to be off then. So we need to make sure that we've opened up these places. And effectively what we're trying to do with the breath, when we think about the diaphragm is this incredibly powerful muscle, which goes up and down, which enables us to bring more and airflow in. A lot of people aren't using their diaphragm very well. They were just breathing up in this shallow area, but we're meant to be opening all of these areas up. What happens is when we use the diaphragm, we're effectively bridging these lower energy centers up into the heart, and the heart is the connecting up to the higher self. So we open this up and we allow a place of our identity, our personality to connect to our higher self, and we connect in this place, and that's when we can start operating from our higher self. So the diaphragm really is that bridge, and we can also use the breath to bring presence into each energy center, and just through our awareness, focusing on it, we can start opening it up and going, oh wow, I've discovered a blockage here. Something is stimulated here where I've gone into scarcity in this area, or I've thought that I need to put a protection barrier over my heart, where the heart doesn't need any protection. The heart is infinite. It's powerful. So effectively, when we have those energy centers all opened up and all aligned, that's when we're at our greatest expression. We're both that human element, but we're also the spiritual element as well. And generally life will just be more easy, more free flowing in that place. We're also able to show up better with each other as well.
Well, it's Finian. It's like a reboot, and I think many of my listeners understand that. But you do talk about practicing presence. It's really kind of a central theme in the book. And I think for the listeners, I obviously listen to a lot of Eastern philosophical material, and I get a lot of people on, and I've been to see the Dalai Lama many times. And when you look at him and he laughs, he's talking about compassion. And he says the only thing that's going to heal this world right now, and I think we're looking at ourselves and the other 8 billion people on the planet, is going to be compassion. And so how can my listeners cultivate a mindset that prioritizes presence and compassion in this world, which is just full of distractions?
So one of the intentions I talk about is practice presence over comparison. When we compare, we are putting ourselves into some form of lack. We're comparing against often other people or other situations, but actually where I find that one of the biggest challenges, we compare against ourselves. These fantasy versions of ourselves or visions of who we were in the past. And it doesn't help us with the agency of right now. Like I go back to my previous story where I was at rock bottom. Comparing was killing me, comparing me of who I could have been, the situation I had. And all it was doing was just making me feel worse, worse, and worse. So instead I had to come back to the present moment and go like, okay, through the breath, connecting what is true right now. I'm alive. I'm healthy. I have opportunity. And in that moment, it gives me a little bit of agency and it helps me go, okay, what can I do right now that's just going to lead me to a better feeling, a better direction? So anything that pulls us back into the present. Also, all creation happens in the present. Like no creation has ever happened in the future. It's just happening right now.
Right.
When we're also, the only way to access the universal mind, this infinite intelligence source, is in the present moment because it just is happening right now. If I'm focusing on the future, by the nature of that, I'm thinking. That means the program is running. So then I'm not able to have any awareness of any insights that come through me. So I'm actually cutting myself off from an incredible intelligence source. So you could either be using a really old computer to process things, or you could be using a quantum computer to process things. You both have access to it.
AI.
We're not present. Let's use the quantum. Let's make only in presence can we use the quantum computer.
So question though, look, we've lived in this and have been indoctrinated and brainwashed by this linear system. Yeah. Life as a linear. So it's past, present, and future. So you say, yesterday's a canceled check, tomorrow's a promissory note. So just stay right in the middle, which is present. And, Eckhart Tolle obviously talked about that, and Deepak talks about that, and, all of these great writers. In one sense, that's wonderful to speak about it, but the programs are so strong that we're carrying. The only way to break those is to break that belief loop about who we are and what we're thinking and what we're doing. And you said in this area I think this is an important one because you speak about heart coherence, and it's intriguing. Explain what it is and how it can be achieved through these intentional practices, and also talk about the universal mind and its omnipresent nature, because, these go hand in hand, really.
Definitely. So heart coherence is when we actually get our heart and brain working together. They're both very powerful organs. They're helpful. And it's not that one is necessarily better than the other, but they need to be working in harmony. We've created this story that our intellect is in our mind, in our brain. That's where everything comes from. But actually through the Heart Math Institute, they've discovered that the heart has a greater awareness. Like it intuitively knows the question you're going to ask it before you even ask it. Like it just knows. It experiences everything. And what it does is the heart receives the information and sends it up to the brain to process it, and then the brain sends information back to the heart. So what we need to do is make sure they're working together to get in that place. Now, we've also understood that there's a direct link through your psychological state and your physiological state. You can change one by changing the other. So if we're in a very challenged physiological state, like I'm very high tense, high energy, I can just start connecting to the feeling of just lying down under a tree, like the psychological thing, and I naturally will feel better. Or if I'm in this mental state where I'm just looping and I'm criticizing myself, I can just use a down-regulated breath, one which activates the parasympathetic nervous system, and a longer exhale on the inhale, and naturally I'll start calming down. So in heart coherence, we actually use both. What we do is we start with the physiological, we start slowing down our breath. We're regulating a breath, a beautiful breath in and out for 5 seconds. You can even elongate the breath out a little bit longer. If you just start doing that, naturally you'll start feeling a bit more calm. Then we go into an imaginary state where we go to a time in our life where we just felt a lot of peace and love and joy. And what's really interesting is the subconscious can't tell the difference between something happening really or through your imagination. So when you go to that place, chemicals start getting released, which start relaxing, oxytocin, serotonin, you start getting released and you start feeling more relaxed. And in that place, you've now got into a coherent state. When we're in a coherent state, that is the place where we're able to learn the most. We're able to be present the most. It's also where we're able to allow the intelligence to come through us. So for people who are wanting to study or who are wanting to be really, I use this with entrepreneurs and CEOs all the time in a corporate environment, we want to make sure we're in a heart coherent state before we go into any deal transaction or before we need to learn something, because that's when we're going to be at our greatest intelligence effectively, because we're not just relying on our intelligence, we have access to the universal mind. The nature of the universal mind is that it's all-knowing, all-creative in everything at all times. It's this infinite source of energy. It could be the mind of God or the mind of absolute. By the nature of that, that means that it also is in us. And that's where the old saying, like, you are God, like, that's where it comes from. Because if it's in everything at all times, by nature, and we are manifestations of, it means we have to be part of it. So when we connect to that, whenever we realize that by criticizing yourself or shaming yourself, that's a lie, because how can the perfect, divine, infinite intelligence be anything other than perfect, divine, and infinite? So that helps us to connect to our truth.
Well, you're speaking about something that I believe in, and I hope all the listeners out there do. But for years and years in religion, not spirituality, there was a division between the two. Yeah. All right. And while this philosophy has moved forward, what you're speaking for, interestingly, at lightning speed, there are still people out there that have divided this omnipresent essence from who they are. But in essence, we are it. I'm going to let my listeners know I have the same belief, and you have the ability to tap into this. And, you know, the heart coherence thing and Doc Childre and Bruce Cryer and all that, if people want to go to that heart mat route, they can go down there and look that up. But get this book, Intentionality, most definitely, because this outlines it. The other thing is that as we were speaking, I was thinking about flow, because Stephen Kotler's been on here 6, 7, 8 times talking about the flow genome. And when you look at these chemicals that are being released that you just talked about, the serotonin, oxytocin, and all the rest of the things, those are created in this state of flow. It's a great place for lots of creativity to occur and imagination to expand, and a good spot where you don't recognize any, people that get into the runner's high, they talk about that. So you really, in essence, through intentionality and through your coursework, you're speaking with our listeners about how they can tap this and use breath as the central theme point to reprogram, readjust, and build a whole new life for themselves, which is more in the present. So look, if you were to leave our listeners with a takeaway from here today, like, hey, this is the big takeaway, what would that be, or what would they be? Naming maybe more than one. And what could you do to assure them that when they do adopt whatever you're going to tell them, that it works? Because I see thousands of people that have been through your guide, given through your programs, that are giving huge accolades. And I'm here to tell you, I think for my listeners, that Finnian is the real deal. He's lived it. He's experienced it. He's not just somebody from the outside that's saying, hey, go do this and we'll do it. He's actually had to figure this out on his own in a lot of rough experiences. And those are the kind of people that you should be willing to listen to and follow. So what are the takeaways, dude?
All right. So one is that you're born with everything you need to build the life you're searching for, because we all have access to the breath and the universal mind, and they're the two most powerful creating sources. So that's first. Second is you have contributed, perhaps unconsciously, but you have contributed to everything that has happened in your life. Now, that can be challenging and confronting, because a lot of the time we're like, well, how? That was so horrible what happened to me. And we want to be in the victim experience of it. And I definitely was there as well. But it wasn't until I accepted that was the moment that I got liberated. Because if I've contributed to everything, it also means that I can change everything. So that was a really important part. And the third, what we're searching for, when I said you're building the life you're searching for, we're searching for a feeling. That's all we're searching for. So the quicker we start prioritizing those feelings now, the greater our life will be. And I can tell you, it is possible. Most people have no idea how incredible life can be. It is magical. Miracles are being made all the time. I spend the last part of the book all about making miracles. And once you start realizing that you actually do have agency and that you can transform yourself, whoa, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful world. So that's what my biggest thing I'll leave you for is it's possible and it's beautiful and it's available to you.
Namaste, my friend. Very well said. For all of my listeners, the book is Intentionality. The author is Finnian Kelly. He also has another podcast interview and other books that you can look up as well. But this is an exceptional book. It really takes the years of his work and it's kind of consolidated into this book. So if there's something you wanted to do and wanted to experience with relation to leveraging energy and discipline and all the things that he's actually put it all in this book. Then what I'd like you to do is go out and check out his website at finniankelly.com and look at the testimonials, people out of the breath work. It's got a fantastic website and lots of resources. And for all of my listeners, here's the book, Intentionality, Finnian Kelly. Go get a copy of that book. Thank you for that. Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.